Welcome to everyone to the Department of Consumer Affairs Wednesday webinar. Going to talk about what does DCA enforce today. So about the meat of our content for today, what laws does SCDCA enforce? So we have over 120 laws that are under our jurisdiction. So it's no surprise that about half of our 45 full-time employees reside in our legal division. So we have attorneys, we have investigators, we have licensing folks, and we have our support staff. And our mission here at DCA is to protect consumers from inequities in the marketplace through advocacy, mediation, enforcement, and education. So when we were first created back in 1974, they did so that we could take consumer complaints, regulate the consumer credit marketplace, and intervene in certain rate making matters like utilities, and at that point in time, I think milk rate making was big. But today, we're really going to talk the most about how we regulate the consumer credit marketplace. So when we talk about the consumer credit marketplace, we're usually talking about credit transactions. And so that includes credit sales. And a credit sale is when you buy a product or a service from a particular company or a particular vendor, and you get to make payments on it to that particular company or vendor. And then you have a consumer loan, which is where you go to a bank or a lender, potentially a credit union, and you get money so that then you can go to a particular vendor and buy that product or service. So you're getting money from a third party to then make your purchase or enter into your transaction. Consumer leases and consumer rental purchase agreements. And so this is kind of the base of what the department gets to regulate: credit sales, loans, leases, and rental purchase agreements. But the key word in there is that they have to be consumer based. So a credit transaction, what makes that up is you have a transaction. So it's a contract between two folks, right? At least two folks entered into. One of those folks has to be an individual, and the individual has to be entering into the transaction for a consumer purpose. So again, we got consumer coming out, right? We are the Department of Consumer Affairs. So what is the consumer purpose? That means that that person is getting that product or service for personal, family, or household purposes. So the loan or the purchase is to be used by and for the person and or his family. It does not include that you're getting that particular product or service to make money or for another business purpose. So if we determine that someone is engaging in a consumer credit transaction, they are getting that product or service so they can use it by themselves or with their family. What does that mean? That means the South Carolina Consumer Protection Code, which is where the majority of laws that we administer and enforce are located, is triggered. So once we make that determination, it'll tell us what disclosures are required, what charges are allowed. And disclosure would be things like if there's certain advertising disclosures that have to be made, what has to be in a contract, truth in lending requirements. You know, if you get a product or service and there is interest and multiple payments, you get the little box that shows you how many payments there are, what your finance charges are, what your amount of payments, how many payments you're going to be making, and the total amount that you're going to be paying over the term of the contract. That's a disclosure. As far as charges permitted, so in South Carolina, businesses can charge whatever interest rate they want. It's just that if it's a lender charging over 12%, then they have to get a license from the South Carolina Board of Financial Institutions. Or if anybody is charging over 18%, then they have to file a maximum rate with our office. And we post all of that on the website, so you can check out what interest rates folks are filed for. And then it also puts forth notice requirements, different items that you may need to be made aware of. So say, this happens a lot in mortgages. Say you get a mortgage with XYZ mortgage lender, and then they sell to ABC mortgage lender. So they have to give you notice of that. Cancellation provisions. Speaking of mortgages, you know, there's a certain time period in which you can cancel the transaction. I will say there is not a blanket 3-day right to cancel a consumer transaction. We see that a lot in the area of auto purchases, where folks think that you have 3 days to be able to turn in a car if you don't like it, but that's not true. That's not under the law. There's certain statutes give certain cancellation provisions, and with credit counseling, I think it's a 10-day right to cancel. The mortgage side of things, I think it's a 3-day right to cancel. So it's industry specific or transaction type specific. The Consumer Protection Code also lays out prohibited practices. What is a creditor not allowed to do? It kind of says what they can do and what they can't do. Some of the prohibited practices are, you can't garnish wages. You can't say that if that another state's laws apply to the contract, things like that. And then it lays out the creditor and debtor rights and remedies as a whole. So some of the hot topic items that fall in the Consumer Protection Code and in what we get to administer and enforce here at the Department of Consumer Affairs includes debt collection and repossessions. It's a lot of notice requirements. So one of the notices you have to get if you're in default for not making a payment is the notice of right to cure, that you can bring your payments up as though you never missed one, things like that. And then unconscionability goes in with debt collection. So they can't call you and harass you or threaten that they're going to take you to jail if you don't pay your debt. It also contains provisions about ID theft protection and what businesses can and cannot do in that area with your personal identifying information. In mortgages, it has an attorney insurance preference requirement to where you have to receive notice that you have the right to pick your own attorney to close a mortgage, which is a requirement in South Carolina, as well as your own insurance company. And there's a process laid out in the law for that. And then we have different laws about advertising. And those are just some of the examples, the specific examples, because again, the Consumer Protection Code, at least in the first 6 chapters, is a very general, applies to anybody, any industry that engages in consumer credit transactions, those sales, those loans, those leases, those rent to owns. And these generally apply to those folks. But in addition to regulating folks who offer credit, we also regulate specific industries too under certain statutes. So we were established in 1974. They put forth the Consumer Protection Code. It gives us our responsibilities, our duties, our charge for the general consumer credit marketplace regulation, in addition to the other items that aren't really enforcement, but just participation kind of statutes. Then in the mid to later 80s, we started getting specific industry statutes assigned to our office. And there are 13 industry specific statutes. And last year we processed 30,000 filings and applications amongst these different folks, these different groups. So in the mid to later 80s, we had 4 industry specific statutes assigned to us. That includes motor clubs, which they offer memberships for motor club services, and that includes towing, emergency roadside or travel expense, guaranteed hotel motel rates, new car pricing, things like that. Physical fitness, so that's personal trainers, gyms, clubs, studios, anything dealing with your health, weight control centers, tanning centers, which a lot of folks don't think of for that. Pawnbrokers, which, they lend money for goods or personal property and you can redeem it or repurchase it at a later date. And then mortgage brokers, and they bring a borrower and the mortgage lender together, right? They're that in-between party, and that includes correspondents, loan correspondents, and third-party loan processors and underwriters. So that's all in the mid to later 80s. Then we get to the early 90s, and 3 more industry programs are added to our bucket. So we have continuing care retirement communities. So that includes independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing care. And essentially it's lodging along with nursing, medical, or health-related services that are provided to folks who are 65 years of age or older. Athlete agents. This is one of those random ones, but the core of it is the contract. And that's really what we do with the continuing care retirement communities as well. The Department of Health and Environmental Control has some regulatory authority over them to make sure that, they have the proper nursing facilities, that if they have, they have some kind of a restaurant style in their facility, like a restaurant in their facility. So they deal with all that. We're dealing with the contracts. We deal with the money, the finance side of things. And it's the same thing with the athlete agents. Athlete agents have to be registered with our office if they're recruiting or soliciting student athletes to enter into an agency contract. And it's that contract, there's a lot of contract provisions for items that have to be included in the contract there. And then professional employer organizations, which kind of sits on its own. This is a business where they share employment responsibilities with a client company. And that client company is essentially outsourcing certain payroll, benefits, and recruiting tasks to that professional employer organization, but they become a co-employer. And usually it's smaller businesses who contract with professional employer organizations so that they can get better rates, especially in the insurance area. So that's 7 programs that we got between about 1984 and 1994. And then in the early 2000s, we got 3 more programs, and that included prepaid legal, where they offer contracts for legal services or reimbursement for legal services for a predetermined specific periodic fee. It's usually a monthly fee. And then discount medical plan organizations, they do something similar to prepaid legal, but it's in the area of healthcare services with participating providers. It's not considered insurance. And then motor vehicle closing fees. And so this is where a motor vehicle dealer, if they decide to charge a closing fee, which is oftentimes referred to or known as a dock fee or an administrative fee, if they want to charge a closing fee on a contract, they have to comply with that particular statute. So then in the mid-2000s, we had 3 more regulatory programs, including mortgage loan originators. So we had already been regulating the brokers for quite some time. And then you started seeing some issues arise with the actual employees of the mortgage brokers. And so there was kind of a nationwide push to getting the loan originators done. Whoever did not input mortgage loan originators into the regulations after the Great Recession did, under the federal mandate that we had to do that. But essentially, mortgage loan originators are those employees of a mortgage broker who engage in those mortgage brokering activities. Then we have credit counseling, and credit counselors can offer to improve your credit rating, reduce debt, or eliminate your debt. And that includes credit repair companies, debt consolidation, debt management, foreclosure assistance, loan modification companies. It really is a broad definition and runs the gamut. But credit repair is definitely included in there too, which is where we get a lot of complaints, and debt settlement as well, which we got a lot of complaints early on and still get some, I think, in the debt settlement arena. Pre-need funeral contracts. And so this is where you have a funeral home who is selling a contract for the purpose of performing a funeral service or providing merchandise or services in connection with the final funeral of somebody, but the person is currently with us when they enter into a pre-need funeral contract. So you're still alive at the time of the contract. So that is the array of different areas where we have specific jurisdiction over an industry. And they all come from, they're all in law. As a state agency, we only have the authority that is given to us by the General Assembly and the governor, whatever is put into statute. And it really runs the gamut. We get to put our hands in a bunch of different pots. So in the administration and enforcement of this, I'm going to give you some examples of what we've seen. So this is information from our last fiscal year. So our fiscal year runs from June 30th through July 1st. So we just finished up fiscal year 22, and we had 281 enforcement actions during that time. A lot of the enforcement actions stem from folks who fail to file what they're supposed to file, like with credit grantor notification. Folks are supposed to let us know who is in the consumer credit marketplace in South Carolina. They're supposed to give us that heads up. There's a threshold of $150,000 in annual receipts to trigger that requirement, but that's usually what we see with the credit grantor violations. Similar with maximum rate, it's a filing, and so a lot of times with those issues, it's because someone did not file that they were going to be charging in excess of 18%, so then they're required to roll back to 18%. But then we also have, I think there's a funeral home on there, and we have some recurring issues with funeral homes, including that they're not licensed to do pre-need contracts, or they are licensed, but they don't put it in a trust account because someone is entering into that contract when they're still alive. They may live for 20 years or so. We all hope to live into some late age there. So you want that money to go in a trust account to make sure that it's there whenever the person actually passes and it's ready to use that contract to have their funeral paid for. Then we also have some issues with auto dealers. There's a couple on there. Some recurring issues that we've seen with auto dealers is with the closing fee area, not disclosing it properly on the contract, inflating charges paid to a government agency, and representing to a consumer that the value of a used car is MSRP. And then we have mortgage brokers. Under the law, there's a mortgage broker fee agreement, again, kind of putting out disclosures and notices to consumers. And sometimes the mortgage brokers will not use one that's incompliant. Sometimes we have issues with that attorney insurance preference that I mentioned earlier, to where there's not a true ability for a consumer to choose who they want as their attorney or insurance company based on actions of the mortgage broker. And then with physical fitness facilities, oftentimes there it's a failure to file with our office, or that they are not executing a contract with consumers if they are engaging in services that exceed $200 or 3 months, and they have to do a written contract. So those are just some examples. If you go to our website at consumer.sc.gov/news/reports, we have our state of credit reports posted there. And part of that, what we're required to do is to let folks know what the issues are that we're seeing in different regulated areas. And so you can go there to see what we're finding on our administration or through our administration and enforcement of our statutes. So how do we know when somebody is potentially violating the law? A lot of times it's due to compliance reviews and inspections. So we have 5 investigators that go out on the road and do reviews and inspections of regulated entities. And last fiscal year, again, June 30th through July 1st, we had about 160 different activities during Q4, but overall in FY22, 555. And it's a mixture of advisories, compliance reviews, contacts, inspections, and Consumer Product Safety Commission recall checks. And essentially what the advisories is, they're going out and making sure that new companies are aware of what the rights and responsibilities are. They usually happen within the first 6 months of us licensing a new company. Compliance reviews are when we're going and doing a deeper dive to make sure that the company is complying with all of the requirements of the statute. Contacts, sometimes it's like, hey, we noticed that you look like you're a pawnbroker. Are you licensed? And they just kind of pop in from what they're seeing when they're going out across the state. Inspections, those are usually a lower level of a compliance review, to where we're more of like checking off a list to making sure that certain items are there. It's not as deep as a compliance review. And then the Consumer Product Safety Commission recalls, or we're just kind of assisting the Consumer Product Safety Commission in making sure that recalled items are pulled from shelves. So again, 555 compliance reviews, inspections, or other investigator activities during FY22. And the map there shows activity from June in the different counties that our investigators visited. I think it was 21 counties that we had visited, at least in that quarter. Another way we find out is consumer complaints. So as I mentioned earlier, you all are kind of the boots on the ground, right? You're letting us know about the different kind of scam tactics that are going on out there. And you also let us know about certain business practices that you think may not have been appropriate. So we get about 4,000 complaints annually. It used to be closer to 3,500, but since COVID, it has certainly eked up in the 4,000 range. And then we also find out from industry reporting, because while the Consumer Protection Code is meant to protect consumers, it's also meant to level out that playing field, right? And make sure that businesses are all held to the same standard. And so if you have a business and someone else is not doing what they're supposed to be doing under the law and taking your customers, then they often will report that to us, because everybody is to be held to the same standards. Here's some examples of enforcement actions that we've done over the last few years. And our number one goal whenever we enter into an enforcement action is to make sure that consumers get the money back that they should not have paid in the first place, right? As I mentioned, the law sets out the fees and charges that can be charged by licensed individuals or those who register. So that's our number one goal. Rarely do we issue fines. That's a smaller bucket of the revenue that comes from enforcement actions. So this is an example of a joint action that we did with the South Carolina State Board of Financial Institutions. As I mentioned, the board licenses lenders who are charging in excess of 12%. We also have some jurisdiction because they have to file with us too. And then we, as the general administrative enforcer of the code, have the enforcement arm of the Consumer Protection Code. So in July of 2015, we settled with Cash Call Inc. or Western Sky Financial, and were able to get $500,000 for consumer restitution. They forgave all outstanding loans, which is about $9.15 million. And then they removed all credit history of loans so that we could restore the credit of affected South Carolina consumers. That was huge. And then we also had a settlement agreement back in 2017 with Ocwen Mortgage and Loan Servicing. So part of what we do too, if it's not so much on the consumer refunds side, which there were some folks, some South Carolina consumers who had overpaid Ocwen with regards to trust accounts. So there were some refunds there too. but we also negotiated for them to change their escrow platform and to get a third party to audit that platform. So we want to make sure that whatever it is that's causing the issue is rectified so we don't have future violations. And then we have one of our recent cases from February of 2021 that it was another joint action. This time it was with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Arkansas Attorney General's Office. We had a 2-year case against a couple upstate attorneys in South Carolina and their affiliated company, which was called Upstate Law Group. And we were able to get $725,000 in consumer refunds, and it also banned the 2 attorneys and the law group from brokering or offering pension loans or collecting money related to those, or offering financial services that was unrelated to the regular course of the practice of law. So we want to make sure that consumers get their money back, but we also want to make sure that businesses put practices in place that will prevent future violations. And these are just some examples. I mean, I know many moons ago, we had to take over a pawn shop too, so that folks could get their items back when the person didn't pay their lease and they were getting evicted. We've also had to assist with transferring pre-need funeral contracts whenever a funeral home shuts down for whatever reason. So, and quite frankly, we found out, I think, about at least one of those items because a consumer let us know that had occurred. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known. So your voice matters for sure in assisting us with enforcement. And then oftentimes, again, education being a core of our mission, trying to make sure folks know their rights and responsibilities under the law. So oftentimes when we have enforcement or even going along, because we see recurring issues in our compliance reviews that may not even lead to the level of enforcing, like a formal enforcement action. It may just be that we let them know that they need to fix a certain practice and things along those lines. So we do a lot of joint education efforts that sometimes go along with the enforcement side of things. So a couple of examples: in March 2015, the FTC and 32 law enforcement partners nationwide participated in Operation Ruse Control. And this was a motor vehicle dealer specific outreach. We had sent letters to 2,500 of the dealers in South Carolina to remind them about our authority under the law, especially in the area of advertising and enforcing that. We'd also created a guide for auto dealers and sent that to them. We created a guide for consumers when purchasing vehicles, and then encouraged dealers to report possible violations of the different laws. In February of 2017, we did a partnership with the Lieutenant Governor's Office on Aging. So we created Ditch the Pitch, which is our guide to avoiding scams, and we're able to get that distributed to 9,000 consumers statewide who were served by the Office on Aging's home delivered meal program. So that was a really cool effort. And then scams not only affect consumers, they also affect businesses. So in July of 2017, we were able to partner with the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce and warn businesses about fake email requests. And so about 43,000 South Carolina businesses were provided tips on how to guard their company from falling victim to CEO imposter scams. And then we do some partnerships with the utilities, with South Carolina Utilities and the Office of Regulatory Staff, because we see a lot of utility imposter scams. With the temperature dropping here in South Carolina, I imagine that we'll be seeing those again. Usually it comes around November or so. And then in September of 2020, the FTC and over 50 federal and state partners participated in Operation Corrupt Collector. And so this was a nationwide law enforcement and outreach initiative meant to protect consumers from phantom debt collection and abusive and threatening debt collection practices. So we created a guide for dealing with debt collection at that point in time. And then later on that year, we participated in Operation Income Illusion. And so it was basically dealing with scams that target folks with fake promises of income and financial independence that do not have a basis in reality. And folks were taking advantage, or scammers, I should say, were taking advantage of the pandemic and financial crisis and trying to make folks victims of those. So we issue press releases when enforcement comes down, again, for the purposes of education for both consumers and businesses. And this kind of shows you some of the ones from the educational outreach too. All right. So with y'all being one of the top 3 ways that we find out that someone is not complying with the law, we certainly encourage you to file a complaint with our office. You can even, if you don't think it rises to the level of a complaint, you can give us a call or shoot us an email and let us know about what occurred, and we can kind of advise you from that point on as well. But you can easily file a complaint by going to our website, clicking on the How Do I arrow and clicking on File a Complaint there. And our website again is consumer.sc.gov. If you would rather file one on paper, you can call us toll free at 800-922-1594, and we would be happy to mail you a complaint form. So what makes an effective complaint? If you tell us what happened, include key details and copies of supporting documentation. We encourage you to let the company know prior to filing a complaint with us that you are not satisfied, to see if you're able to resolve it. And if not, you can file this complaint and let us know what you have done to try and resolve it, along with those details and copies of supporting documents. And then also let us know what you think would be a fair resolution of your complaint. What are you looking for it to be a satisfactory resolution? And once it's submitted, once you file that complaint, we'll work to get it processed within 2 business days. And then we give it to the business and give them 20 business days from the date the complaint is mailed out to them to respond, or emailed out. We have this online complaint system that has made it very efficient to where our average time frame to close a complaint is about 24 days. So you filing it online and the business having it online has enabled us to bring those complaints to a resolution in a faster manner. If the business does not respond, then we'll do a first follow-up letter and provide them 10 additional days to respond, and a second follow-up letter is sent after that expiration of the first follow-up to give 5 additional days, and then we'll engage in outreach through other methods to try and get a response from the business. Sometimes that includes looking up additional contact information, making sure we have phone numbers and email addresses to make sure we get to the right person, because sometimes that's the reason why we haven't received a response, or sometimes it gets sent up to corporate as well. So that's our complaint process. We also have additional resources for y'all. If you go to our website at consumer.sc.gov and click on consumer resources, you can see under the FAQs grouping that we have consumer publications on topics such as money and credit, including that consumer auto guide that I mentioned previously, dealing with debt, computers, identity and privacy, housing and mortgages, health and fitness, and scams. We also have help for homeowners, where we have some of our homeowner association tidbits, some law overviews, as well as some educational materials, and then some other resources and spotlights there. And these are some of our popular items. We have a guide for dealing with debt collection. Again, debt collection is a top area for consumer complaints. And then that guide for guarding against scams that I mentioned, where we did the partnership with Lieutenant Governor's Office on Aging to get this into folks' hands, the Ditch the Pitch guide, that's available as well. And you can also scroll down on our website to get a copy of Ditch the Pitch, to look up a business, again, finding information on complaints and making sure folks are properly licensed. And you can also click to stay informed so that you can get DCA email updates, order brochures. You can request a presentation through that link too. And as far as ordering for brochures, I think right now you can get hard copies of our Ditch the Pitch. You can get it of our Identity Theft Protection Guide, our auto guide. We have a credit report guide as well. And there may be one other one that I'm not thinking of that we have printed multiple copies of that we can mail out to you. So we also encourage you, because this is Cybersecurity Month, to check out our Cybersecurity Basics flyer. I think you can get a copy of that one right now as well. I think we ordered those to get those out to folks too. So you can go on our website, or you can call us again, 800-922-1594. If you're not calling us from a South Carolina line, like if you have a cell phone that is from a state outside of South Carolina, you can call us at 803-734-4200. Again, that's 803-734-4200. All right, again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all stay warm and have a great rest of your day.